Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the last day of July. Hope your summer's going well. Today we are in Leviticus chapter 26. Leviticus chapter 26, and I think this chapter helps us understand Jewish history really well because the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, were slaves in Egypt, and God sent Moses, performed the 10 plagues, freed the people, led them to the promised land after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness because of their sin, given the 10 commandments and all of that. They go into the promised land. And here in Leviticus, God is speaking to the Hebrew people through Moses before they ever make it to the promised land. And he says, when you go into the promised land, the land I'm going to give you, if you obey me, I will bless you greatly. If you disobey me, I will withhold those blessings. I will withhold my protection. I will discipline you. I will punish you. So negative or positive consequences based on their response to the ordinances of God. And he talks about that very forcefully in this chapter. Look at verses 1 and 2 of chapter 26. He says, you shall not make for yourselves idols, 10 commandments, nor shall you set up for yourselves an image or a sacred pillar, because in some of the pagan religions of the Canaanites and other places, they would build these almost like carved out of wood or out of stone, carved statues, if you will, that were tall, and they worshiped those. Nor shall you place a figured stone in your land to bow down to it, for I am the Lord your God. Verse 2, you shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. So he says right off the get-go, don't you dare participate in any of these pagan religions. Don't erect idols, statues, none of the stuff don't you do it. God says, I am holy, and you are to keep my Sabbaths. You are to reverence my tabernacle, my sanctuary, later the temple, and not worship at any of these statues, at any of these idols, at any of these pagan ritualistic religious sites. Basic commandment. And he says, if you obey this commandment about other religions and idols and statues and stuff, and this commandment about my tabernacle, about the Sabbath, if you will obey me, I will bless you. Look what could have been, verses 3 and 4. He said, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments so as to carry them out, then I shall give you rains in their season, so that the land will yield its produce and the trees of the field will bear their fruit. Look at verse 6a. He said, I shall also grant peace in the land. Verse 7, you will chase your enemies and they will fall before you by the sword. Verse 11, he says, moreover, I will make my dwelling among you and my soul will not reject you. He said, if you just do what I tell you to do, it's going to be good. But there's a warning. If you don't do what I tell you, it's going to be just the opposite. And actually, he spends more time warning them than he does. Well, I guess that says a lot about what God knew about these people, about us. Verse 14, he says, but if you do not obey me and do not carry out all these commandments, the ones about statues and pagan worship and the Sabbath and so on, if you don't obey me, he said, verse 15, if indeed instead you reject my statutes, and if your soul abhors my ordinances so as not to carry out my commandments, and so break my covenant, I in turn will do this to you. What's he going to do to them? I will appoint over you a sudden terror, things that will make you scared to death, consumption and fever, illness, that will waste away the eyes and cause the soul to pine away. Also, you will sow your seed uselessly. for your enemies will eat it up. The Philistines did that a lot, came in and stole their harvest. He said, I will set my face against you so that you will be struck down before your enemies. You'll lose in battle. And those who hate you will rule over you, and you will flee when no one is pursuing you. Verse 18, if also after these things you do not obey me, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. Verse 21, if then you act with hostility against me and are unwilling to obey me, I will increase the plague on you 7 times according to your sins. Look at verse 23. And if after all this, these things you are not turned to me, but act with hostility against me, then I will act with hostility against you, and I will strike you 7 times for your sins. Verse 27, yet if in spite of this, after all of this, you do not obey me, but act with hostility against me, then I will act with wrathful hostility against you, and I will punish you 7 times for your sins. In other words, it's going to keep getting worse. Verse 29, further, you will eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters you will eat. It's talking about famine. And we know when the Babylonians surrendered Jerusalem, and then later when the Romans surrendered Jerusalem, famine and eating the dead, cannibalism took place. Verse 31, he said, I will lay waste to your cities as well, and will make your sanctuaries desolate, and I will not smell your smoothing aromas. Your sacrifices, they won't mean a thing to me. Verse 32, I will make the land desolate so that your enemies who settle in it will be appalled over it. And you, however, I will scatter among the nations and will draw out a sword after you as your land becomes desolate and your cities become waste. And then one last verse, verse 38. But you will perish among the nations, and your enemy's land will consume you. And when you read the rest of the Old Testament, it becomes clear that while there were seasons when the Hebrew people kept God's commandments and obeyed him, there were many, many, many more seasons when they did not. And once they had a king, which is not what God wanted in the first place, most of their kings were evil, not good. In fact, when they had civil war and became 2 nations, the northern kingdom of Israel or Samaria, each and every one of their kings were sinful and evil. And even the southern kingdom of Judea, the majority of their kings were evil. And so you go to the book of Judges, and the Philistines are constantly raiding the people. And every now and then, God would raise up a judge like Samson to free them for a period of time, but then they would fall back into their sin. Things would go bad again. During the years of the kings, the same thing. The northern kingdom in 722 BC, totally obliterated by the Assyrians. And the people, most of them carried away as slaves somewhere else, as captives, resettled in other parts of the Assyrian Empire. And then the southern kingdom of Judah, those tribes in 587, Babylon razed the land and destroyed Jerusalem and burned Solomon's temple to the ground and deported thousands of the people to live in Babylon. Most of their history, they weren't free, didn't have peace. When you get to the New Testament and the Gospels in the time of Jesus, they've been ruled for some time by the Romans. And just before 70 A.D., the Romans got sick and tired of the Jews rebelling all the time, and they sent Titus and their army in, and they destroyed Jerusalem and burned Herod's temple, the second temple, destroyed it, leveled it to the ground. There's not a temple there now. Hasn't been one since the Romans destroyed it. The Jews were dispersed among the nations, and throughout the centuries, they've lived all around the world. They've died in the midst of other nations. The Nazis in World War II. Years before they ever lived in the promised land, God said, if you obey me, I will bless you, bless your land, and things will go well. But if you don't, they won't. For the most part, they did not. And things were tough. He goes on to say there will always be a few who survive, a remnant. So many Jews have died over the years. Anti-Semitism is a sin. What the Nazis did was one of the greatest sins in human history. And it's not that God did that to them. It's just that God, because of their disobedience, removed his protection. Now, there's a principle there for you and me. When we obey God, there's blessings, and when we don't, there's not. It doesn't get much more simple than that. Sometimes people go out and they make bad choices and they sin and they do things they know they shouldn't do, and then bad things happen and they say, why did God do this to me? God didn't do it to you. You did it to yourself by your sin. God simply said, I'm not going to bless you or protect you. If you want to be stupid and make bad choices, I'll speak to you and try to get you to do the right thing, God says. But if you go down the wrong road and make wrong decisions, you do that to yourself. Don't blame God for messes you create. Anyway, that's the thought from Leviticus 26. I read this and reflect, and I often think about what could have been. What could have been for the Hebrew people, for the nation of Israel? What could have been? And I think about my own life and other people's lives sometimes, and I wonder what could have been. What could have been if we had obeyed God more fully? But that's life, isn't it? Obey him all your life. And if you're young and listening to me, don't waste any season of your life running from God, because you will one day regret it. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow as we look at Proverbs 29.